Welcome to another digital strategy session here on Poker TV. My name is Christoph Hess. I'm from Kuble, the agency behind all of this, where I work on strategic challenges, problems, and questions. And some of them I'm discussing every Thursday at 2 p.m. with experts from various fields. Today, we focus on influencer marketing, and my guest is Matthias Göllner. He joins me from London, where he's in charge for strategic growth at CreatorIQ. Welcome, Matthias.
Hi, Christoph. Pleasure.
And a very warm welcome to everybody who watches the live stream as well. Keep in mind, if you have a question, just use the live chat. All these questions pop up here so that I can discuss them with Matthias. And my first question actually is from my guest 2 weeks ago. Like this, we can create a connection between the sessions because everything is connected in the digital field. And 2 weeks ago, Konrad Weber was here, who just left Swiss radio and television, where he was involved into the digital transformation. And with him, I discussed about the importance of having the right mindset. And Konrad's question to you, Matthias, is how important is having the right mindset for influencer marketing?
I think there's been a development for quite a while, a shift in the perception of what influencer marketing should do and what brands and agencies want to get out of it. And these developments have been incredibly exacerbated over the past month. The idea of influencers shifting their mindset to be more conscious, to be more involved, to be more authentic, and really showing what they care about and how they communicate a message for a brand. Examples of influencers sending pictures from tropical islands in times of lockdown. All these kind of examples have incredibly put forward the notion that mindset shift needs to take place, how influencers conduct themselves, and also how brands collaborate with influencers in those difficult times.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned having the right mindset and maybe also having a common definition for influencer marketing, because both for consumers and many companies, influencer marketing is just a hype, just a buzzword. How would you define it, and where do you see the substance?
I would say, obviously, it started with what everyone probably associates with influencers in fashion and beauty and typical industries. But it has been very much evolving. The term is much broader. It evolves much more around the idea of leveraging influence to achieve what you want to achieve as a brand, from a business perspective. It's got much more broader. Influence is not just the typical influencer that you would see on social media. It can involve everyone. It can involve someone from a community, an ambassador you're working with, even your own employees. And that kind of broadening of influence obviously made the term broader itself, but also the idea of managing it properly more complex and more kind of strategic for brands as well.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the complexity, and I already mentioned CreatorIQ, the tool that you represent. Now, how does CreatorIQ help companies to manage this complexity, or in general, how does the tool work?
We are a technology company, pure play tech SaaS platform. We're based in LA and have been working with major brands and agencies for a while to support them essentially in all things influencer marketing, from the initial discovery, finding the right people, all the way through managing campaigns and getting the right data on the back of that. And primarily, we're working with brands who really want to take influencer marketing to the next level. This idea of gaining in-house control and really elevating influencer marketing as a strategic initiative along with other marketing channels. And when I'm saying in-house, I not necessarily mean doing everything yourself, but rather really gaining control about data, about relationships, to really focus your efforts, your money, your time in the right directions and elevate influencer marketing and professionalize it along the way.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a first question regarding sort of the starting point for influencer marketing initiatives, about goals, objectives. What typically companies who work with CreatorIQ or in general, what do you think, which objectives are realistic, and which goals and objectives do you observe?
Mm-hmm. So there's definitely, alongside the evolution of influencer marketing, there's also been an evolution of how people look at influencer marketing and how they measure it. Coming from like typical social media based perspectives on measuring it, like reach, impressions, the typical goals here, to elevating influencer marketing to other channels and putting the same scrutiny towards that. So we're seeing a lot of brands who take this next step to take a much more like business and strategic perspective on measuring that, to go beyond the initial kind of awareness stage, to move also in terms of consideration, in terms of conversion, to really have a more end-to-end perspective on measuring influencer marketing. And on the back of that, also taking a perspective of integrating influencer marketing in your overall digital marketing reporting and data footprint.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned various use cases. Can you go into some more detail about maybe use cases, projects, or even clients that you work with?
Yeah, I'd say there's a few interesting developments and potential use cases that go along with the themes that we're seeing in the market. So the first one coming from what we just mentioned around measurement, ROI data. This is generally something that we, obviously, as a technology provider, push a lot with our clients to really help them get the transparency and the focus. And one of the use cases I've recently been working with, it's really, really interesting. It's the context of a global gaming and esports provider, where we work with the central team to really get them the transparency they need across all the different regions, across thousands of influencers, key opinion leaders they're working with, and get that streamlined, really understand what's going on, build out the reporting, first of all, within influencer marketing itself in a campaign context, really understand end-to-end performance at the campaign level, at the influencer level, even at the individual post level. And then on the back of that, integrate that with their overall digital marketing reporting. So we're talking about building the connection with their overall campaign reporting through API and integrations that we're then scoping out and building with them. And on the basis of that, this then helps them to really act more efficiently as a central team to inform local markets, local regions, and get a dialogue going, optimize, streamline how they approach as a whole, while still being able to account for regional idiosyncrasies. So that was one really interesting use case. And another one that's more around what we see with various our customers who operate very globally is this idea of improving transparency, streamlining workflows, but still maintaining the flexibility for them as a complex global organization. So this is really about how we connect different teams, how we streamline the work that they're doing with each other, but also with influencers, and really make sure this is seamless end-to-end. We cover all stages of the workflow, but still help them to kind of operate in certain regions in the way they need to operate with the flexibility. So this is where we move from kind of the idea of technology ecosystem to really enabling collaboration ecosystem with their agencies internally. And in that way, it's really interesting. We've seen it a lot in the past couple of months in particular, where this sort of connection, streamlining, collaboration helps actually those brands to be much more agile when things actually shift very rapidly, where they can adopt their workflows, they make changes, they switch the approaches they're working with influencers, and thrive throughout this crisis and eventually come out stronger on the back of that.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned API and data, and we have another question. So the question is, does CreatorIQ offer an API itself so that beyond the tool, in other environments, your data could be used?
Yes, this is something we're seeing a lot with, in particular, more strategic advanced clients. So what I would recommend is always to start with the influencer marketing workflow, influencer marketing in a nutshell, almost optimize that, really understand what's going on from end-to-end perspective, And then when you take the next steps to integrate with your broader technology ecosystem, this is then where we leverage API to build those use cases. And some of the typical ones we're seeing is around data in particular. How do you connect with kind of a broader digital marketing reporting through data warehousing, BI integrations? Other use cases are around data enrichment, where we pull in data from other sources to help the brands really build this like one single source of record to really understand and enrich their profiling of influencers, their campaigns, how they act, how they continuously improve, and then various other cases that, for example, relate to signatures, how when you work with influencers, streamlining contracting workflows, all sorts of different ways. But ultimately, I'd always break it down, have workflow and data on one and the other side. And around that, we work with a lot of strategic clients to really scope those use cases and help them eventually make influencer marketing a part of their overall technology stack and not have it operate in isolation.
And speaking of data, would you agree that data helps influencer companies when it comes to content to be more creative?
There's definitely something that goes a lot in this direction with the more visionary things, the more innovative things that we're doing. So just imagine, first of all, with the finding the right people, using not just like keyword analysis, but also visual means of discovering the right influencers to work with, seeing who are the brands they've been working with in the past, to really, from a perspective of start with the right people in the first place, to really understand who they are, who they've been working with, what is it that they're doing. And then once you're working with them, start using more like predictive models to really understand, based on previous campaign performance, which is the content that could work well through visual clues. Start leveraging data models to understand certain patterns in your campaign information, in your content, in your visuals. So I'm talking about content attributes that we start identify through data modeling, and then ultimately to leverage certain insights from your organic performance, your paid performance, from audience demographics to inform your paid strategies, and optimize on the back of that through a way better improved audience understanding that you would have through your own just like research, etc. Because ultimately influencers is like this wealth of information that you can in some way or the other leverage to optimize your approach to customer experience and customer journey management as a whole.
So you described this selection process. There's one more question. Is it better to focus on one big influencer or to have many smaller micro influencers? How would you say, how would you approach such a question?
So first of all, that obviously depends on the goals you have from a campaign perspective. That would always say, take a step back, look at the business objectives that you have and see what could eventually that mean for you as a brand. Generally, we're seeing the trend definitely going in the direction away from celebrity and macro influences to more micro and nano influences, because this is really something where a way more authentic connection, a way more engaged audience, a way more loyal audience usually can be found. But also, of course, with more challenges and complexities behind that, because the pool of potential influencers exponentially increases when we're talking about essentially everyone. And so there's definitely a way stronger trend, along with the trend of having more long-term relationships, having more authentic engagement, that you would probably find more with people who are operating in a certain niche, in a certain region, in a certain community. And we've just started an interesting project with a fintech in Germany, where they have hugely diverse audience, anyone who's basically a kind of small business owner. And this is where we help them identify, not just like going out there and find the right people. We're talking potentially barbershops, handymen, taxi drivers, all sorts of people who might be leveraging the service. And you can imagine this is like people who might not have a great social media following, but the social media following they have is very relevant, and also then from a business objective, referral, word of mouth within the community really important. In the same way, we went back to the CRM, another integration use case. Looking into CRM, first of all, look into thousands of people you're working with. Could there be someone who could be potentially amplifying a brand message? And so it's very multidimensional, but the trend definitely goes in the direction of working with smaller, more authentic people with a more engaged audience.
There's one more question about regional differences that you mentioned. So, from London, you have, I would say, at least Europe on your radar, but maybe globally you can make comparisons. How are countries different when it comes to influencer marketing?
So for us, obviously being a US company, this kind of idea of influencer marketing and the way brands operate at a more advanced level has probably been more prominent in the US for a bit longer than in some parts of Europe. But it's definitely been massively growing in Central Europe, in the regions that I'm also quite working with in Germany, Switzerland, other parts of kind of Central Europe in total. And brands have been really successfully doing that for a while now. I'm not just talking about like campaign activation, but really we've seen some incredibly examples in here in the DACH, like German, Switzerland region, where brands really move towards models of co-creation, consumer participation, developing new collections together with influencers, involving them in your new product development efforts. And then on the other hand, what we're seeing globally is really obviously really interesting developments in Asia, where it's been digital for longer, just mobile for way longer, different social networks, where we see the likes of like TikTok emerging, where we're talking not just like about a trend, but really completely evolving models of telling stories as a brand, and the brands kind of tapping into that and developing that. So it's been really interesting. Europe often has been a bit behind, but they're definitely catching up and seeing some amazing successes here. And yeah, in a globalized world, in context, for example, I mentioned gaming, esports. It's very digital. It's very global. And so it doesn't necessarily matter where the influencer is based and where the brand is based, but also more where the audience is based and how you want to engage with them.
There's one more question about yourself. Do you have a favorite influencer, or is there someone like the perfect influencer that you have in mind?
So I personally see myself actually kind of quite, I'd say, in line with those trends that I've described. So I'm not necessarily following like large celebrity influencers. It's more like very niche. So I'm really into like sports and outdoors and things like that. And so I'm really following influencers in the space of like extreme sports, triathlon, marathon, those kind of areas where I wouldn't necessarily call it like typical influencer. It's more people brands work with from a credibility perspective, and I'm engaging with them because it's really interesting for me. It gives me advice. It to see how they shift it. At the same time, still following some celebrity influencers. Typically in Switzerland, huge fan of Roger Federer, who works with On Running, for example. And they've done some really cool work with him to create home training videos in terms of lockdown. And also I discovered myself going a bit like beyond that. So in the past month, 2 months probably, surprisingly got into home improvement influences and decoration and these kind of things, which might stay or might not. But that's probably some examples from my own perspective.
And sort of based on what you're saying, an influencer is perfect if he or she is in line with my interests. It's not the number of followers or the type of pictures they take. It's perfect because I'm interested and it's entertaining for me or yourself in this case.
It's entertaining, it's informative, and one huge difference for me is I choose to follow that person. So it's not any sort of like creepy optimized ads that are spamming my Instagram feed, for example, or my stories. It's something that I identify as a person myself through suggestions, potentially through friends, through interests. And I make a conscious decision to follow that person, and I can at any time unfollow them. And because it's about relevance, it's about the authenticity that this person gives to me. And this is much more evolving. It's not just because I'm not following people who just like take pictures with products. I'm following someone who has something to say and has an authentic connection with the brand and the idea behind that brand as well. So it's not just about the products, but also the ethos, the vision the brand has, and how I personally identify with that.
You mentioned TikTok before. There's one more question about CreatorIQ. Can you track TikTok data? Maybe I start with this question first.
This is something that we're consistently working with those social networks. There's often a challenge in terms of like the automation and the technical connection that those networks provide via the API. We work with them very closely in the US offices to build those connections. And we also started to include TikTok in all sorts of ways in the platform. So brands can report on that and enrich profiles as well. But this is definitely a challenge in particular with rapidly evolving networks where we try to collaborate with them very, very closely to build those connections, and once they're available to help brands then automate on the back of that.
Mm-hmm. And there's a second question about TikTok. What types of observations are you making in terms of the organic reach? Why is the organic reach so much bigger than with other social media platforms at the moment? It's obviously a completely different way of telling stories, of engaging with an audience. It's very quick. It's very engaging. It's very relevant. It's obviously in TikTok, I'd probably say the average influencer, how you consider someone relevant or micro nano, has other dimensions than on other social networks, because just like the reach probably is bigger to start with. But it's been a very interesting way of kind of evolving visual storytelling. And that's obviously something that's been crazily kind of emphasized in the past month when people just stay at home, they engage more with content. And but I say it's going to be really interesting to say out of the initial hype how brands start evolving that and kind of engaging with creators in a meaningful way to leverage their ways of telling their stories. But it's just a way of really telling stories and being more visual and be more immediate. Mm-hmm. Now let's also look beyond influencer marketing at the whole marketing communications landscape, other projects, other initiatives, other tools maybe also. What do you think are best practice approaches to when it comes to connecting and combining influencer marketing with these other options that are available?
So I'd say, as I mentioned earlier, it's really first of all optimize how you approach influencer marketing as a channel against the goals and objectives that you have from a brand perspective and from a business perspective. And when you think about connecting influencer marketing to your broader digital ecosystem, I'd always recommend not coming from the possibility of technical connection, but rather look at your use cases. So what is it really that matters for me? What is it that makes my life easier? Is it a workflow topic? Is it connecting? Is it more building enriched profiles for my influencers? So we're talking CRM connection potentially. Is it a data and reporting kind of topic because I have huge gaps in understanding cross-channel initiatives and making informed budget decisions to reallocate across those different channels? So we're talking data warehousing, BI integrations. Is it something that's really simple? Is this really isolated? Is it about communicating with your influencers and connecting, for example, from a content management perspective, contract management? Is it about influencer payments, where I have a huge pain point as a company and my people spend lots of time in Excel spreadsheets and communicating with influencers back and forth? So I'd always recommend coming from the use case and then really understand what that means and how I improve my technology ecosystem alongside each other. So there's always a notion of iteration behind that. And it's constantly evolving, but always keep in mind that this is something that might change. Platforms change, technology changes, and not spend too much to build like rigid workflows that might be obsolete in 6 months' time.
Yeah. And there's one more question about, you mentioned use cases and sort of the starting point, but maybe also some companies might realize, well, influencer marketing, that doesn't work for us. The question here is about industries would you say that influencer marketing works in every industry, maybe if there's the right use case, or are there industries in which influencer marketing isn't an option?
It's definitely, there's definitely industries that are more prone generally from how they operate. So we talk fashion, we talk beauty, we talk FMCG, anything that's like very direct consumer facing. And now new ones that are emerging, like gaming, esports, that kind of direction, definitely. But we're also seeing really in spaces that have not been so prominent, just like generally B2B in general. But then again, it's more challenging. It's more difficult to find those people. It's much more. It might be more regulated. I mean, you and I, we've done banking projects in the past. You can probably tell a few stories. And but then again, the ultimate benefit that it could have for those industries who are not like obvious could still be there. Imagine you are in a B2B environment and you want to engage with thought leaders in the space, tech influencers. You are in banking. You're seeing huge shifts of intergenerational wealth transfer, where completely new audiences emerge. Speaking of esports and gaming, completely new wealth emerging. How do you connect with those people? And these connections are going way more in the kind of realm of peer-to-peer credibility, word of mouth. And then again, we're talking about influence. We're not talking about influence in the classical sense where people might think about it, but it might still be worthwhile exploring that, even though the benefits might be more midterm and you have to invest more upfront to kind of change mindsets, coming to initial questions and build those capabilities.
There's one more question about, you mentioned initially that everybody becomes an influencer. What do you think about this employee advocacy trend? So employees becoming influencers and even companies training employees and sort of redefining job roles so that companies say becoming an influencer, a corporate influencer, another term that's used very often, is part of your job.
Yeah. So this is a trend I've seen quite a while, even before CreatorIQ, when I worked with lots of like communications departments of various different corporations, and this is something that is incredibly trendy, but also needs to be done really well. So when you think about the classical, when corporations started to put their executive team out there. But is that something you can scale? Probably not, because there's a huge communications department behind them and helps them engage, they train them in front of the camera, etc. Then there's everyone in the company. So a classical use case is recruiting, HR, where people start sharing job posts on LinkedIn because I want to hire the people who might be similar to the people who already work for me because I trust them. I think they have a good kind of friends and connection network. But where I think it becomes really interesting is kind of the middle layer. So all the different experts that you have in your company, people have really something to say. You are an insurance company. You have probably lots of like financial experts. You are a engineering company. You have lots of people who really know about innovation in the engineering space. You are a car company. You have lots of people who really, really know well about like innovation in that space. And that's kind of the balance between identifying the right people who have something actually to say, but also enabling them at scale. And this is, I think, something where I see the direction becoming the most interesting, because it really then transports not just like a generic message, blasting out job posts, blasting out your latest and greatest about your CSR efforts, but really about something meaningful to say and initiating engagement on the back of that.
Speaking of directions and looking into the future, I'm sure CreatorIQ has a roadmap. You have some trends on your radar. Which types of developments do you see in the future, and do you see coming on the horizon?
So from our perspective, it's a lot around data, predictive modeling, data science capabilities, and build that further out, because ultimately this is where brands will win and make the difference, because they can make more informed decisions, they can collaborate better on improved transparency, and can really take influencer marketing to the next level and elevate it to the other channels they've been using for 10, 20 years, potentially, like email. And generally from influencer marketing as such, we've done a quite big study beginning of the year together with Influencer Marketing Hub. And if people are interested, can obviously ping me on that. where we've interviewed thousands of people in mainly B2C, but also B2B around trends. And this is all these different trends that we partially mentioned, huge trend towards micro and nano influencers, big trends towards gaining in-house control as a brand and really understanding what's going on out there. Then trust and authenticity concerns. How do I identify the right people in the first place? How do I vet them properly? How do I make sure they are safe from a brand perspective? And all sorts of developments that come alongside that. And certain complexity challenges, of course. When I work with thousands of micro-influencers, I have completely different challenges from a workflow and data perspective than I have if I work with 3 celebrities, where I work through the agency. And then I think the most interesting trend, I think, where I very curious how it evolves is how brands collaborate, how they work with their different agencies while maintaining in-house control and have this flexibility, this agility informed by data and push that forward. And ultimately help influencer marketing grow up and become more serious.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges during this development is brand safety maybe. So that's one more question. How do you handle brand safety in terms of copyright and such topics?
Yeah. So there's brand safety. First of all, am I working with the right person? So where we're looking into leveraging data and audience models around do people have an engaged audience? Are they valid to work with? Are they someone who can drive the results that I want? Do they have the right kind of type of following? Is there any indication they have bots in their followership? Is there any sort of indication of follower fraud where we leverage data models on the back of that? Then increasingly work in the direction of visual models where we say, is it safe for you as a brand to work with? Is this person someone who has worked with a competitor, different brands? Do they work with brands that are maybe not a competitor to ours, but aligned with how we present ourselves as a brand? The ethos became incredibly more important in the past month and the developments across the globe. And then ultimately really understanding brand safety also in certain regions. So we started developing models for identifying content that's not safe for work. Are these influencers, imagine your audience is young families. You really need to be careful who you want to work with. And we kind of help leverage data and build data models to help brands identify also like from a safe for work perspective and predicting and really scanning those influencers properly.
There's one more question about data and CreatorIQ features. Do you have CRM functionalities?
Yeah. This is basically falls all under the idea of where we come into play. I mentioned initially the idea of building this in-house approach for a brand, and in-house in that case doesn't necessarily mean they do everything themselves, but they want to have in-house control of data and relationships. And the basis for that is basically have full visibility of those relationships yourself. So what we are doing, we work with the brands and also partially the agency we're working with to build this like single source of truth, which you could term influencer CRM basically, where we help them build their CRM in the first place through discovery, through ambassador programs that we help them launch, and then start enriching these profiles, this information as you move along, as you work with the influencers, as you run your campaigns, potentially enrich that from other systems through social listening and other initiatives that we might be doing. But yes, ultimately the goal and the baseline for this like control over relationships and data and strategy means you also need to have control over the influencer CRM, the single source of truth that you want to ultimately build as a brand and not be dependent on the third parties that it might potentially engage with.
Mm-hmm. This source of truth, does it also help you, and that's another question, to identify bots or fake accounts?
Yeah, this is what we do a lot in the initial stages of influencer discovery. So when you initially find people through various kind of multi-dimensional ways of searching, through their interests, through keywords, through the biography, through the brands they've been working with, And as a second step, when you kind of have narrowed down who could potentially be relevant, you start going into kind of a mode of vetting those people. And part of that vetting process is, of course, identifying signs for influencer fraud. So we're talking about followership. Are there any sort of weird jumps in the followership? How's their following to follower ratio? What is it where's the audience country? Is there any indication, for example, is a regional Swiss influencer potentially has a huge following in Brazil? That might be valid because they're in football, but also might be not valid. And we start flagging that and basically give the brands the ultimate, a better basis to make their decisions. There's always a layer of judgment. Myself as a brand manager looking at that, but we want to make that judgment as informed as possible through the data models that we build on the back of that.
Uh-huh. I already asked you who is your favorite influencer, or who do you follow personally with regard to your hobbies and interests. When it comes to influencer marketing, if someone who watched today live or watches this video later on, I'm sure you're active on LinkedIn, Twitter, you read blogs, you listen to podcasts. Which sources can you recommend to always hear and see the latest and greatest around influencer marketing?
Yeah. So I personally engage with a lot of people on LinkedIn. There's lots of amazing people who drive thought leadership around the topic, and more than happy to kind of follow up with that as well. And then various industry sources like Influencer Marketing Hub, partially where they give news and information. Even sources like Reddit, where there's lots of discussions around that. And personally also, I think just for myself, through the engagement with the brands that I'm interested in, you see incredible innovation appearing. And really, when I'm following someone on Instagram, you see cool ideas popping up to how they develop their stories, how they develop their brand storytelling ecosystem, how they involve their employees into that, for example, and ultimately learning a lot from that. And what I'm personally trying to do when I also have the time, really get really involved with our customers and how they do that. So I've had situations where I've been traveling. I've been using the service of one of our customers, and in the context of that, I started chatting with one of their clients, and then took a picture of them and sent it back to the social media team. And there's various kind of ways, just like observe, learn, get involved with that. You can't talk about these platforms if you're not using them, and really try to keep an open mind, try to take a perspective of what does that mean for a brand, and then follow people who emerge in that context.
Very interesting. Matthias, I think I learned at least 3 things today from you. First, influencer marketing becomes more serious, more mature, and therefore also more complex. Second, you mentioned that everybody becomes an influencer, be it employees or micro-influencer. One of these terms that are very relevant today. And thirdly, what you just mentioned, now be active, like, share, comment, see influencers in action. Many thanks for these insights. I'm already looking at next week's session when Daniel Sager will be my guest. He's a career coach, and the topic for the discussion with him will be personal branding. And again, in order to connect today's session to next week's session, I would like to ask you, Matthias, do you have a question for Daniel? And with this question, I will start next week's interview.
Yeah, I think the question that I'd probably ask him, alongside the notion of brands don't shape their brand themselves anymore. Everyone is a brand. The employee, the customer, your executives. Is there any sort of common theme, common advice that you would share for everyone out there who wants to get involved and working with his or her company to become part of the brand, establish themselves as a brand out there on not just social media, but generally? And what is his advice for everyday Joe, basically?
Very good. I'll keep that in mind. Many thanks for your time, Matthias. Many thanks for watching today or later on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or wherever you will find this video. Have a good time and see you again soon.
It's been a pleasure. Ciao, Christoph.